that the climate crisis teach-in is really delighted to have art, poetry, and other contributors to the teach-in that can help us decide what we value and what we might want to be choosing in terms of climate solutions. And with that, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Dickie Cox, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Beckett. Hi, my name is Dickie Cox, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Communication. I focus on interactive digital media. I am a committee member of ArtNOW. ArtNOW is a performance art and technology visiting artist series that seeks to transcend traditional disciplinary boundaries and embrace provocative works that challenge what we know and what we think we know about art. ArtNOW fosters experiential conversations and art making between contemporary artists who are working in emergent creative practices and the students and faculty within our own academic community. The theme for our season this academic year is restorative relationships during precarious times. Upcoming events include an artist talk and workshop entitled Collaborative Performances for Social Justice by Dr. Tessa Carr on March 7th and 8th, and a talk by, sorry, I lost my place, Victoria Reese, who is the founder and artistic director for Transformer Arts organization on April the 11th. And that talk is entitled, Do You Know Where Your Art Comes From? Provocatively enough. We invite you to all of those events, and we encourage you to read more about those on Monmouth's Center for the Arts website. This evening, there will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so I would invite you to hold your questions to the very end. And for those audience members who are joining us on Zoom this evening, I will be acting as the moderator for your questions. So if you please share those in chat, I will gladly share those with our speaker during Q&A. Thanks so much for being here. This evening, it is my privilege to introduce Professor Kimberly Callas. Kimberly Callas is a new media artist, sculptor, and the lead artist of the social practice project Discovering the Ecological Self. She is currently an associate professor of art at Monmouth University, where she teaches sculpture and advanced drawing. Her work has been exhibited in galleries and museums worldwide, receiving national and international grants and awards. In 2020, she received the first place award in sculpture at the Catherine Leonard Wolf Art Club's annual exhibit in New York City. Recent exhibits include the 2019 International New Media exhibit at the Sika Museum in South Korea, summer exhibition at Flowers Gallery in New York City, 9x12 at Dual Galleria in Budapest, Hungary, and Crossing Boundaries, Art and the Future of Energy at the Pensacola Museum of Art in Pensacola, Florida. Her work has been published in Posthuman New Media Art 2020 by Sika Press and has appeared in the Huffington Post and Art New England. Callas received her MFA at New York Academy of Art and her BFA at Stamps School of Art at the University of Michigan. She maintains studios in both Maine and New Jersey. Callas served as the Urban Coast Institute Artist in Residence from 2019 to 2020 and 2021 to 2022. The residency was part of a new fellowship initiative developed by Monmouth University's Provost Office, which invites faculty members to partner with the university's Centers of Distinction and utilize their resources to pursue a project with a significant scholarly, artistic, pedagogical, business, or policy outcome. Callas received one of the 2 inaugural fellowships and had the opportunity to work with the Urban Coast Institute, our Center of Distinction dedicated to ocean research and policy. Tonight, she will be sharing the outcomes of that residency. So if you will, please join me in welcoming Professor Kimberly Callas.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for everybody on Zoom for coming. So John Muir said, into the forest I go to lose my mind and find my soul. So tonight, into the ocean we go. I'm honored to be here tonight to share with you the work that I created through an artist in residency with the Urban Coast Institute. And I want to thank the Urban Coast Institute for their support and patience through the whole project. The artist in residency was threefold. I made artwork, but I also did a series of workshops through my social practice project called Discovering the Ecological Self. And I wrote and successfully proposed 2 new courses to Monmouth's catalog, which I wanted to just share a little bit about those because it's all interrelated to the artwork that I do. I think I have to get mouse back. Okay, there we go. So I lead a social practice project called Discovering the Ecological Self. And social practice is when artists work with communities around social issues and obviously discover the ecological self. We work with environmental issues. And so we get a series of workshops with my students and as part of the residency. Here are some of my students and I at the Museum of Art and Design in Manhattan hosted us to give a workshop there. And often what these workshops do is we look at places where we can find intimate relationships to natures that can be rediscovered or can be found again anyway. One of the things we use is a survey. And this is some of the survey questions. Often some of our connections we can view come from early childhood. Maybe there's a nature image that you have through a dream that repeats. Maybe there's a particular image or animal that reoccurs in your life that continues to show up through your life. And then we look at what are the personal meanings for you around these nature experiences. And then we look at what are the universal meanings? What have other cultures, how have other cultures made meaning out of them? And the reason behind that is it's a great way to see how humans from all cultures make meaning out of nature and how those meaning makings are the way in the intersection of our kinship. And so we all experience day and night. We all experience, life and death, and we all have interactions with animals and plants. And even though we have different cultures around our food and raising food, right, we all share these experience of the growth of food and the seasons. And so that ends up showing up in all of our language and our shared meaning making around nature. So this is the Ecological Self survey. If you want to take it, you can scan that QR code with your phone, or you can find it on my website at kimberlycallas.com. So the 2 new courses I proposed at Monmouth were, of course, an eco art course. And in this course, we bring together lots of different natural materials to explore around ecological topics. And then the other course is an eco-self called Eco-Self, the Human-Nature Relationship, which is an interdisciplinary perspectives course at Monmouth. And it brings our interdisciplinary perspective courses look at a topic through multiple disciplines. So this course brings together eco art, environmental writing, and the often contested field of eco-psychology to deepen our understanding of the human-nature relationship. We use the traditional form of the field journal for students to become amateur naturalists, and they use the creative arts, close observation, and critical thinking to better understand their own relationship with nature, learn more about a place site of their choosing, and investigate the larger society's relationship with nature. And some of the quotes that I have on there that I really like are, "The broken human-nature relationship is an illusion, a very devastating one." And that's by Robert Greenway, who is one of the founders of eco-psychology. And one I quote often in my classes, "Our body is still carrying on a conversation with nature, but our mind is denying it." And that is nature poet Gary Lawless, who I was fortunate enough to do a collaboration with before. So art and science collaborations. How does one do an art and science collaboration? I'm going to talk a bit about my collaboration with UCI. and how I went about it. Several of my students are here and they might be interested in that. And this is my third major art and science collaboration. I collaborated with Unity College in Maine over the HEMS project, which was around the woolly altitude, the invasive species that is devastating the hemlock trees. I worked with scientists and poets and other writers in that project. And I also worked at the Maine Biological Laboratory in Mount Desert Island with Dr. Kaufman, and we did a project called How We Carry Forward, studying how the past moves into the present and how a phenomenon known as developmental programming with health and disease. So this is my third time that I've been fortunate to work with scientists. It's something that I continue to do through the Discovering the Ecological Self project, where we often work across disciplines. Collaborations between art and science have been growing in recent years, and institutions such as the National Science Foundation and universities like UCLA, many are supporting collaborations now between artists and scientists. So before I talk more about the artwork, I wanted to start with my artist statement and then talk a bit about how I came to the concept of the ecological self.
I long for an ecological self, place within me that still remembers like nature. This cannot be an intellectual understanding. I need a visceral knowledge. As a sculptor, I take the body and write into it with nature's patterns, symbols, and sometimes prayers. Combine the body with the bee, mountain, flower. As an artist, I take the body as a place of knowing, a body that hungers, thirsts, breathes, feels temperatures, touches. Body holds, intuits, communicates through gestures and signs. I take the body as part of the land, piece of land valleys in heaven. And I take the body as the place of transformation. This longing is to be fulfilled will have to come through a spiritual changing of the flesh. If we are to find this ecological self, we will also have to find a new way of knowing, of eating, a new source of order, a new breath. We will have to learn how to wander in that stories.
So through my exploration of the ecological self, I'm interested in how nature shapes our understanding of ourselves and our connection to the world around us. Yet, many of us are experiencing a great disconnect with nature, coupled with feelings of alarm and helplessness over the ongoing environmental destruction. In his book, The Sand County Almanac, Leo Aldipole calls for a land ethic in which relationships between people and the land are intertwined. Care for people cannot be separated from care for the land. The land ethic is a moral code of conduct that grows out of these interconnected, caring relationships. Leopold argues that this cannot come about without a close personal connection to nature, which is why scientists and environmentalists and environmental policy and activists are seeking new partnerships with indigenous communities that still maintain a land ethic and personal connections with the land, such as Robin Wall Kimmerer and The Braiding Sweetgrass is a fantastic book if you want to learn more about her work. And yet the title alone in Richard Liu's book, The Last Child in the Woods, provides a frightening reminder that our separation from nature is ever widening. So this project is to help people rediscover an intimate relationship with nature in order to inspire and help empower sustainable action. The climate crisis isn't just a crisis of physical and environmental reasons, it's a cosmological crisis where the world as we know it and our place within it is no longer understandable. It is a crisis of meaning. As scientists and activists are frantically trying to save species, landscapes, and entire ecosystems, many of them will tell you we have the science. What we need now is the will. We need a shift in consciousness. We need the poets. We need ways to relate socially and emotionally to what the science is telling us. My artwork and social practice are particularly interested in addressing the disconnect between science and emotion. This disconnect between science and emotion, or what the applied philosopher and fellow at the Center for Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity, Jonathan Ralston, calls the disconnect between the facts and the feelings, And I quote, "This crisis of climate change in particular is a crisis of disconnect between the facts and the feelings. We know something's true. We don't feel it's true. We don't live as if it's true. We speak as if we believed it, but it's not obvious from our behavior and the way that we vote and what we campaign for, how we talk, that we accept this as a real problem." So the question becomes, how can we connect facts and feelings and help people refine and create meaningful connections to nature that will enliven environmental action? And it was my hope to reawaken this connections that led me to the ecological self work, because as the environmental writer and activist Terry Tempest Williams states, for lack of intimacy, we are bleeding from the roots. So now I'd like to share about the art making collaboration with the Urban Coast Institute, and talk a little bit about how I went about the art and science collaboration. And like many artists and scientists too, whenever we start a project, it's really by immersion. So I immersed myself in the research that was taking place at UCI. I was fortunate enough to go to several of the conferences they led. I also attended conferences at Rutgers University with Dr. Duckett. And I was interested in the work by Tom Harrington and his lectures on ocean rise. And I also, sorry, any water? Several of the scientists helped me with images. I have some mangrove trees by Dr. Danashkar, and Keith Dutton sent me some sturgeon, which are going to be used in some later artwork. We were fortunate enough to go on a boat ride. Jim Nichols took us out and with Dr. Jason Adolph, and they showed us their different research sites. And it really, through going on that boat ride, you really get a sense of, you're looking right at the skyline of New York City and all the buildings on the Jersey Shore, and you really understand urban coast. So this boat ride really influenced how I decided to approach some of the work. And it was interesting on how it influenced me, because when I was there, I felt like I couldn't see anything. I was struck by how much I couldn't see, how much I couldn't know. I could see as far as the horizon line, which would become an important symbol in the work. The urban coast really looked home because we were looking at the sea and the skyline. Yet I felt blind to all that was going on below me. In the statement that I just played for you, I talked about a visceral knowing. And when I'm working and thinking about my work, I pay attention to what does the body know? And what is the body telling me? I could feel a great vastness that was below me, and I could feel the unknown depth, something so vast and unknown, and the not knowing was all there was, an incredibly vast dark room. I knew that this feeling would be important for the work and one I wanted to communicate. So there were two main draws that I was thinking about when I left the boat ride. One is the draw, of course, to the horizon line, which many of us know. And then there was the draw to the great distance below. I also would visit the ocean regularly during this time. I'm fortunate to live, and I took a series of photographs and videos that I then put together with some sound work of breathing, and which is going to be used when it's going to be used in the exhibit of the work in 2025. And Michael Boyle, Matthew Boyle put it together, but I didn't get it into the talk yet, but it's going to be out for the exhibit. So, so since I'm particularly interested in the idea of how we make meaning out of nature through symbols, archetypes, and how that's all rooted in our language and our vocabulary, right? You might plant a seed in someone as a thought, right? Or you might say, oh, they're a rock, or all these different ways that we use language, symbols of nature in our language. And so what I did was I visited also the Archive for the Research in Archetypal Symbology, which is in New York City. They also have offices in, I believe, Chicago and also LA. And the RS, as it's called, RS and UCI represent the two aspects of my work. So it's part of bringing together the facts with the feelings. And artists don't just create new things to be novel. We do so because each new creation helps us get closer to expressing more about this life. So we need new forms and different forms and from various voices so we can each explain part of the elephant. And we'll never get it all, so we keep creating, but we need different angles to come at to try to get at the truth. So I went to ARIS and they're very generous and set out all these books on water and ocean and the color blue, various gods that are associated with the ocean, like Agnew, Neptune, Oceanus, Nut, different books on the moon, stars, waves, net, boats. And later on also I looked at plants and various animal species. So some of the things I took away from that were the navigating by stars and how important that used to be, right? Life and death aspects of navigating by stars. The horizon line as something far seen, the place to go to, right? The next world. And then all those symbols that were associated with the ocean, they all seem to come back through the readings, through a larger archetype, which was this night sea journey. This major archetype that Jung talked about and recognized in his work. The archetype of the night sea journey it's a common motif in literature and art and poetry. And it represents the symbolic journey of the soul and the quest for self-discovery. So it's often depicted as a journey through the dark and the unknown, where the protagonist faces challenges and obstacles along the way that lead to the transformation of the self. And it's a journey of self-discovery and a quest for new meaning in life. And so since I'm interested in the transformation of the self and addressing the climate crisis, I thought, oh, this is an interesting topic that I wanted to explore more. And I want to share, these are some of the images that I took from ARIS. And I did drawings while I was there. And I'm going to share some of the drawings because I know some of my students are here and I'm always telling them, do little rough drawings, and they don't believe me. They think that the drawings have to be this great, artwork. And so these are just notes that I took, and some of these are very small. And this reoccurring pattern, of course, which we see a lot in ancient symbols, is this zigzag form, right? And so the zigzag form can represent water, and often water and energy are related. The wave is related. Energy wave or energy water. And then this one up in the top corner, when you see the wave, in that drawing is when the goddess appeared, and then they would show the waves from the energy that this was the moment of the epiphany. So I love this wave continuing to show up, and it's such of course, an obvious connection, but I'm like, I want to do this in a little more of a symbolic wave, the symbolic, rather than just the wave of the ocean. I also love these overturned vessels in relationship to water, which was the overturning of doom, the vessel of doom, which I haven't used yet, but I really plan on to. And then another big symbol that came up that you'll see in some of the artwork is the ocean coming from the source of tears, right? So we have this, of course, it's the salty water. There are many stories of the idea of the ocean being created through tears and the idea of divine moisture, which brings fruitfulness. And I was looking at different characters that are related to like Jonah and the whale. This is Oceanus and Terra. And those kept coming up as well, of course. I made a big vision board, which I do with my students, and decided that I was going to focus on this night sea journey. So in my artwork, both in my artwork and in my social practice, I'm interested in building up a symbolic consciousness where we can create new belief systems that are healthy and life-sustaining. I bring together specific places, species, and persons with the larger nature-based cultural symbols and archetype. So in this series, I chose to call on symbols like the whale, the boat, the moon, the horizon line, and the tree of renewal. While I acknowledge the primacy of the ocean in climate regulation and stability, its role as habitat, and the issues of massive plastic waste, I also refer to the ocean as a symbol of the cosmos and the deep unconscious, the psyche that sometimes tosses up new meaning onto the shore. I created a series of large panels. This is 10 feet and 10 feet by 4 feet. And they're inspired by historical nautical charts. I was inspired by an artist named Michelle Stewart, who doesn't do any artwork, anything like this, but she's a land artist. And she was a cartographer. And the way they used to make these old maps and nautical charts was adhering this paper onto muslin with these drawings. And so this is a drawing adhered to dyed muslin, and then the muslin is adhered to canvas. Each of the works is marked by a latitude and a longitude lines. And there's an underlying theme of the exhibit that of migration, of species migration due to climate change and warming oceans. And so the latitude and longitude lines that are associated with each one of these pieces follows the northern right whale's annual migration from the coast of Florida up to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. It's pretty hard to see, but you can see these cross lines, and I have some detail shots of the latitude and longitudinal lines. The whale in the whale boat is based on the right whales who regularly travel through the Jersey Shore. There are just under 350 right whales left. Collisions with ship and entanglement and ropes shortens their lives and have greatly reduced their reproduction and growth rate. My work questions what meaning and wisdom leaves as we lose these species. UCI's Jim Nichols last year participated in the freeing of a humpback whale that was entangled. And when they released it, it had thousands of pounds of netting, ropes, and steel cable wrapped around it. And what's frustrating right now about the right whales too is that their migration areas are changing. And so places where we have put in protection of slower boat speed and less lines, they're moving out of those areas due to the warming, and so they're moving into unprotected areas, and so we're losing them. And also they're not reproducing as much because of the stress that they're under. I debated using whale imagery. They're so seductive, right? It's just almost too easy. What Thomas Mann calls it, and Dr. Faustus, he says music is the cow's warmth. And I felt like, oh, is it too dangerous to use the whale as too easy to use? But there's so many other species that are dying. And in a lot of cases, scientists now are having to decide which species are going to get to live, because only the ones that we focus on saving have a chance of making it through without us protecting their habitat, helping them move, or helping them adjust to a new climate reality. Save the whales has sadly become a cliche, and with under 350 right whales left, some say, is it even worth it? But I want to come back to the original concept of bringing together the personal and the universal. I kept looking at how do I, a person who grew up in a house sandwiched between the national and state forests of northern Michigan, outside a tiny rural town called Mayo, how could I relate to the ocean and the urban coast? How was I to bring something personal and intimate to the process instead of just being a witnessing outsider? And ironically, I kept coming back to the whale. When I was young and continually, I have these repeating dreams of whales. one in particular where I'm standing on the edge of a precipice, and the whale comes right out over the water to the level where I'm standing. And I know I can touch it. And bizarrely, I know how it feels. I've touched one before. Though, of course, in life, I have never touched a real whale. In the dream, I desperately want to feel this feeling again. But each time I reach for the whale, a seagull comes and hits me in the head and pushes me back. So I just can't reach the whale. So like a Jungian psychologist might say, oh, they might interpret this as your mind getting in the way of you accessing this more visceral experience, which is something about how I might interpret it. So I'll talk more about the whale in the next artwork. But for now, we just see like the whale as this, let me see. Oops. I'm gonna go back to this painting. The whale is, you know, that monster in the deep and the thing of the unconscious that needs to surface. But this was what I was going for as the boat, right? Being a metaphor for the self and not sensing what's underneath you, right? Not sensing what's below. These are all sort of in some way mathematically laid out, and the circle that's within the whale is the same dimension as the inner circle of the flower. And I worked with aqueous mediums, so I decided to work with all these fluid mediums for this project. So this is dyes, and then I work with inks, and I worked with water soluble, not charcoal, graphite. And here I'm doing that where you take the paper and you adhere it to the dyed muslin. And then I colored in the drawing around this great labyrinth. Technically, it's a maze. And the central flower, or the six-sided rosette, as it's called, is in the center of the whale. And this is a reference to the great labyrinths, and again, which is again a reference to, right, the great journey or pilgrimage. In the Middle Ages, during the Crusades, when it became particularly dangerous to do pilgrimages to Jerusalem, cathedrals were built to become pilgrimage sites. Various cathedrals would have labyrinths designed inlaid in the stone floor, and a pilgrim would travel to the cathedral instead, and often walk the last part of the pilgrimage through the labyrinth on his knees. So the center of the labyrinth is relating again to the seeking of God, or the seeking of truth, or the seeking of knowledge. The Chartres labyrinth with the 6 petals or semicircles around the center, this was a place where several pilgrims would pause for prayer, and it was large enough so that one person could stand in each petal. It's associated, of course, with Mary, or the rose, with love and union. And also the central circle is associated with wholeness. And the sections of 6 are often said to represent mineral, plant, animal, human, angelic, and divine. And so I referenced the central location within the whale as the same scale as the circle within the boat. And so there's an echo here, or a premonition. Here's just some, so you can kind of get a better sense of the scale of these things. They're pretty big. The patterning on the boat is this net pattern that I repeat through the series. And I don't show too many of them tonight, but this is over and over in the series. But I just wanted to show that it has like this beautiful texture to it. It's like this raised Gouda. Again, you can see how big they are. This is us photographing them next to these chairs in this auditorium. And then the next piece is called Woman in Whale. Not that creative with titles yet. So now we've come up to the Jersey Shore. That whale was in southern Florida, the latitude and longitude lines. This latitude and longitude lines are 40 degrees north and 73 degrees west. So it basically takes Long Branch to just past Sandy Hook. And the depth charts are not too far off the Jersey Shore. They represent the areas where the whales are likely to frequent, which isn't too close to the shore yet, also isn't right next to the real drop off. And so now we're completely submerged. Maybe it's even the next day, since now we can see sunlight shining down into the water. The labyrinth is still there, though it's been inversed, and we have the woman in the whale, a Jonah-like figure. Here's the latitude and longitude detail. This is the area that this piece. I'll do a quick recap on Jonah for those of us that might not remember our Bible or have ever read it, I don't know. So God tells us the prophet Jonah to go to Nineveh and deliver the word to them that if they don't change their ways, they'll be destroyed. But Jonah says, no way, I'm not going to Nineveh. And he goes the other way, hops on a boat in the opposite direction. But of course, you can't outrun God. So God sends this big storm. And the sailors want to know, why is God sending this big storm, right? So they throw lots. There's a lot of throwing of lots in the Bible. And they decide that it's Jonah's fault. And he says, yeah, it's my fault. I'll jump overboard. So he does. He voluntarily goes overboard. But God doesn't leave him like that, right? He sends a big fish to come and swallow him whole. And he's in the whale for 3 days before it releases him on the shore at Nineveh, where he's had this transformation of spirit, right? Change of mind, change of heart. And he goes and gives the word. So in the New Testament, the story is seen as a foreshadowing of Christ, since Jesus was dead or in the underworld for 3 days, and says the only sign that will be given is the sign of Jonah. But there are also many other images of people and fish, and this is Vishnu. Now Vishnu wasn't eaten by a fish. This is one of his avatars where he was a fish to come and save the people from the flood. But he's often shown eaten in the fish, which I just, as his person, this was one of the images floating in the RS's bathroom when I was doing the research there. And here's Vishnu again. And I love this one, like all of us parents who always wished we had 4 arms. Here they are, you know. So many artists, like myself, sometimes we interrelate our work. And often if I make a large work, I'll have other relating pieces that relate to it. But I wanted to relate the figure within the whale with another figure that I'd made called Cave. This is a detail of Cave on the other side. It's a reference about the shared symbology of the whale and the cave. So the whale then becomes the cave, right? The place where you can go for contemplation and transformation. It also becomes the womb or the grave, right? To die to the self, to be born again, or in Jungian terms, die to one's ego in order to find the true self. Ah, come on. Oh. Sorry. So I just wanted to show some process shots, set out some big drawings. And this is for scale. This is hanging off of the back of the studio. There's this, I don't know. And I wanted of course, I wanted the labyrinth to be, really technically transversible, a real maze. And though mazes and labyrinths aren't the same thing. A labyrinth has one passage that you meditatively walk through, and a maze has the stops, and it's meant to confuse you. But we call this the story of the labyrinth. So I laid out the thread to make sure that you could truly get through the whale, and then I stepped back and I sort of had to laugh at myself at the reference to Theseus and getting the threads to find his way through the labyrinth to battle the Minotaur and half beast hidden at the center of the great labyrinth. It was built by the one we often call the first sculptor, Daedalus. So doesn't like to go. Just some of the beautiful dyeing. I love the color, and it's very rich in person. It's richer than what you can see when I've sent it to a couple of pieces have been exhibited in galleries, and they always say, oh, wow, it just looks incredible in person because the colors are so rich. I always like gnarly feet. I have some gnarly feet. So I had all that research, and I had dyed all this fabric, and sometimes I would dye it on the table, and underneath there was this beautiful paper that was left. I said, oh, I have to do something with that. That's gorgeous. And so I didn't want to lose like all this writing that I had done. And so what I decided to do is I created a piece I called Trace Whale. And it was sort of influenced by when I was working with another collaboration with the scientists. I made a whiteboard because scientists always have their whiteboards up. And so in the gallery around where that was, there was the exhibit, and then there are all these whiteboards. And so I put on all the whiteboards, all my research that as an artist I did. So it had drawings, and it had, you know, the technical research and the things that I was inspired by with the science. And so I decided to do that again with this piece, even though it's sort of another version of The Woman in the Whale, but it takes all my notes, and then I do something, you know, it's called trace, where you just backwards, you put them on, you glue it on, and then you wipe off the paper, and all the writing stays on the artwork. So I put all these pieces, and this has the notes from the meetings with the scientists, and some of the imagery and notes from Eris. And again, there's that, I've been looking a lot at tattooing and markings of bodies, because I've been working on a series of how place marks us. And so tattoos are, you know, of course, a natural marking that we do. And this was a tattoo that had that wave pattern in it again. And I'm like, oh, I have to use that. And so I created just some, you know, some silly stencils and printed, not stencils, sorry. Printed them on that. And then this also has the Jersey Shore map and depth charts written into it. Okay. So now we move up to the latitude and longitude of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. This figure originally was supposed to be located in the Gulf of Maine, but in the time period that I was in the residency, it was becoming clear that the right whale's migration was moving north, and they were being seen less in the Gulf of Maine, and were now showing up more in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where they were previously extremely rare. Scientists are watching and tracking what their food supply and other issues that have triggered this change. And now these fisheries have to respond to these whales. So in this image, now, right, the transformation has occurred out of the whale, and the self can now go and reach the new shore. This one's called Night Swimmer, and the protagonist is released from the whale, and now the cosmos, the sea, and the self are one. The image is a horizontal, almost the horizon line itself, and the swimmer's body is stenciled with constellations and becomes matched with the night sky. And so I knew I wanted to have a swimmer, and of course, I have a good friend, Anne, who is an ocean swimmer. She swims every day, and conveniently she had a son who is a photographer, and so I asked them to go out, and they took photos and short videos to help me come up with exactly how the pose would be for the swimmer. And then I slowed down the video to see how the arms and legs were positioned to one another. And I did several drawings and sculpted a small model. This is some old maps that I ran into. I was trying to figure out, like, how does that work? Had some students move around this model for me. And what's great about I then scanned it. And so in a 3-dimensional model, I can just move it so I can change the horizon or the perspective easily to decide exactly how I wanted it. And what's important to me is that you're looking up at the figure, right? And so the ocean and the sky really are interrelate. And here's just some of did a large drawing. Then I simplified that drawing and glued that onto the muslin. This is made a little bit differently because I'm not dyeing the muslin. I colored the paper and then I'm using strips of fabric that I had to fit the figure into. I couldn't decide if I wanted a red sky or not. But I have good friends, artist friends, and they're like, no, don't go with the red sky, but I'm going to do a red sky eventually. And so you can see the strips of paper or fabric, and then just some detail shots. Since it's hard to see this up close, since this one again is like 10 feet. No, sorry, it's 8 feet. And I had to have a compass rose. So. And here, this one, you can see a little bit more of the latitude and longitude lines, but because the light's a little better. Okay, so that's that piece. And so you're looking up at the figure. She could be in the sky, she could be in the ocean. And a lot of the symbols for the ocean and the sky and the cosmos, they all interrelate and they're all interwoven through many, many creation stories across cultures. And it's like Emerson talks about the problem with symbols is they're so fluid. But this one, I really love that concept where the horizon line's gone and it's sky and it's ocean and it's cosmos, it's all one thing. So I've been also intrigued with this idea of trees walking north. All the maple trees are moving north. 200 years, Canada is going to have a monopoly on maple syrup. And so this tree, so this is the last large piece. And I used the mangrove tree. We're now at the North Pole, at the top of the world. And mangroves already look like they're walking, right? They're already taking steps. And the symbol of the tree in the boat is an old symbol. And it's just so intriguing, right? Like, why would you have a tree in a boat? Why does it keep showing up across cultures? Here, right, Sumerian, Greek, early Renaissance. And a lot of it has to do with, right, when we go to a new shore, we want to carry our roots with us. We want to bring life with us. And it's often called, you know, it's the tree of renewal that gets taken to the new shore. And the tree is, here it can be interpreted in many ways, but it's always sort of this idea of a spiritual or mystical journey, or some type of journey where the tree is representing the stability that comes with you, so that you're going to have your own heritage and identity, even though you're going to a new and unfamiliar shore. So here I'm playing with, you know, the decorativeness and the tangle of the mangrove. The mangrove is a very important tree to the ocean ecosystems, because they protect the shore from the storms and the surges. And when they start to move out of an area, it destroys the ecosystems. And so we have a scientist here who's studying mangrove in the Bahamas and other areas, and what's happening to those areas as the mangroves have to move. It's decimating those areas. And so now we're at the top of the world, the North Pole. Our boat has grown. And it's as if the tree could migrate right off the earth. And I'm kind of, playing, not playing, but references these sort of distressing ideas that if we finish with this planet, we could just go to the next, right? But it is the idea of heading to a new shore, bringing life with you, new life, new shore, new hope. And, like, I think it was really poignant that cartoon Wall-E, you remember that, where they're so Wall-E and Eva, they're carrying around that little plant, right, so carefully in all these treacherous situations, and as if life depended on it, right? And of course, life it does. This piece was, it's all collaged on dyed muslin. Some layouts of the drawing. And I had just this beautiful rice paper, and then I dyed the muslin and adhered that rice paper to the muslin. So these are big, again, big pieces.
You're doing great, Mom.
I had to put that in there. My family really helps me a lot with my artwork, and I really appreciate them. And let's see. No, you go. So here I just collaged on, it's just paper. And again, large. And then we adhered it to canvas, and there's my mom helping out. It's just too much for me to handle. And then I had to figure out how to get the latitude and longitude lines on this piece, because now I'm dealing with the global, much more of a rotation. So I just laid out strings and figured that out. Yeah, so those are the major works. Those are the major big works and the major symbols that I worked with. I created a whole series of smaller works. This is just a snapshot of some of them. A lot of nets and boats and more whales and some digital work. I did a little bit of calligraphy, which I will continue to do later as I build this out. Some more map work, figures and maps, and then I was given this great present by Susan Hill, one of my friends, of these beautiful, gorgeous pencils, graphite pencils. I had to use them. So I did a series of black and white drawings. These are 20 by 14, I think. And again, all water soluble, all this liquid and moving and not being able to control it. You can see there's a bit of cross hatching in here. This one eye, it was so wet that it just started moving up the page. And I was like, oh, wait, stop, come back. Thankfully, it stopped a little bit. So this piece is called Submerged. Oh, that one's called Source. Remember I was telling you about the tiers and the formation of the ocean. So yeah, I just wanted to share some of there's so many stories of the ocean being formed by tears. Oceanus, the god Oceanus, cried tears and formed the ocean. That's in Greek mythology. Hindu mythology, the ocean is said to originate from the tears of the god Vishnu. Vishnu was so moved by the suffering of his people on earth, he cried tears of compassion and formed the oceans. In the traditional stories of the Pacific island of Tonga, it is said the ocean came from the tears of the goddess Vile. She cried tears of sorrow because of the loss of her loved ones, and these tears formed the ocean. In Chinese mythology, the story of the goddess of Weiwu, who was so sad, she cried tears that became the oceans. And in the Bible, there's reference in the book of Isaiah of the sea coming from God's tears in the context of God's judgment. So, lots of tears and oceans. There's lots of water. I mean, of course, water, the image of water, but the effect of water and spritzing, and you can't quite tell. But so As I mentioned earlier, my artwork's rooted in the belief that we're not separate from nature, but rather an integral part of it. And in my art, a lot of the body carries markings and memories of place. And I liken the body to become a map for new meaning making. So as I continue to work, I'm going to begin exploring the idea more of the body as a map, both physically and metaphorically. As poet David White says, the human genius lives within the geography of the body and its conversation with the world. It is the meeting place between inheritance and horizon. So I'm doing some experimental work that has textured figures. Here it's maybe hard to tell, but sort of there's seaweed growing there. There's cells and other types of texture. And I'm going to be creating some life-size figures that are eventually going to be polychromed as well, not just white, but. And then so as part of this exhibit, I will have some life-size figures that will go along with these large drawings. And if you save the date, the following January, we're on museum time, 2025, we're going to be having an exhibit at Monmouth University for the Night Sea Journey. And then I'm also seeking venues, and they could be art and science venues or science venues. I'm interested in exhibiting this work and following that migration up the coast from Florida up into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So I'm seeking those venues now. If you have any ideas, let me know. Also next November, I'm going to do a small work sale of those little pieces. So if you want to join my newsletter, you can get in on that too. So in conclusion, through my artwork and social practice, I'm interested in building up our symbolic consciousness and meaning-making ability so that we can socially and emotionally relate to what the science is telling us about our rapidly changing world. I hope that my work will inspire you to think about your own connection to nature and how we can all work together to protect it for future generations. And I'm happy now to take any questions. Thank you.